Hi, welcome back to How to Run a Professional Business Meeting. In this section, we're going to be looking at how you actually run, facilitate, drive, or carry out the meeting itself. So we've planned and prepared. We have developed a robust meeting outline. We've defined what documents should be reviewed in our meeting. We have identified our attendees. We've appointed people to fill key roles. Most importantly, we've defined what our objectives are. We know what we're trying to achieve from this meeting and have developed a meaningful agenda to help us get there. Well done. Now, the chair of the meeting needs to take the reins, and we need you to steer the meeting. You have to make sure, as the meeting chair, that the attendees stay on course. You manage digressions. You manage people going into too much detail to really rein them in, to focus on what we're trying to achieve. You move the agenda on if we've over-discussed an issue or we're not really getting anywhere. Ensure that actions are getting captured, and if you can tell the action tracker, your scribe is a bit puzzled or bewildered about a certain action, or you're not sure she captured that action, then you should let her know. Have you got that action? Or specifically say, please, Jonathan, take that as an action. So again, it's important as the meeting chair that you steer the meeting in the direction you need it to go. And if you do feel the meeting is getting away from you, take a few minutes, ask everyone to be quiet, and try to get back on track. Next, you need to keep people on track and focus on the agenda. So linked to my previous point, this is around the people side. You've got to make sure they focus around what we're talking about in this meeting. If you get people who are consistently digressing or losing focus, you may want to have a conversation with them outside of the meeting to really let them know what's needed and also how you can help them be better focused. One way I have found with people who like to digress a lot in meetings is I've had them be the timekeeper for a period. And they can actually see firsthand the challenge of digressions in us trying to achieve a successful meeting in the allocated time that we have. Next, you'll need to park important but irrelevant issues. So if we're having our weekly performance meeting and we're part of the maintenance team, and someone mentions that, they think there's a problem with the catering, that maybe the lunches they're providing we don't have enough vegan and vegetarian alternatives. Now, that may not have anything to do with the maintenance team meeting per se, but it may be important generally for team morale. That issue should not be discussed in the maintenance review meeting. What the manager should do, what the chair should do, is capture that issue and put it in a parking lot. And your parking lot should be a list that you generate of things that are not relevant to the meeting but could be important, and then you as the meeting chair will deal with those parked issues at a later date, maybe not in this meeting ever, but it gives your team the assurance that you've heard what they're saying and that it's going to be addressed. And I find quite often this helps people move on from topics that aren't relevant. The meeting chair also has to manage the time of the meeting. It's very important that you ensure that we give the different agenda points the allocated amount of time for discussion. And while we may not get that 100%, and it's unlikely we'll be 100% all the time, as the chair of the meeting, you have to continually strive for that. What may happen in many meetings is we may keep to the overall time of the meeting, so the 1 hour meeting will be completed in an hour. But we could spend 45 minutes discussing the first agenda point and now rush and squeeze in the last 15 minutes, 7 agenda items. What happens in that case is the last 7 items often aren't discussed fully, and we don't really get the resolution of issues or problems. I also see as a habit in managing time is that people may be tempted to put the more important issues at the end, kind of like saving the best for last. I think it's more important to have a first things first approach. The most important topics in the meeting must be discussed first, and they should be given more time. Things that are not as important or could possibly be postponed till next week should go later on in the meeting. So as you're developing better time management practices, but you're not so good, you're not sacrificing the most important content because you're poorly managing time on the less important. Something to think about the less important content would also be, if it's not that important and it can wait for a couple of weeks to be discussed, does it really need to be in this weekly meeting or in this daily meeting? Maybe that less important item could be an agenda item for a monthly team meeting, and it won't clog up and take time away from more pressing topics. These are the kinds of things as a manager you need to think about in running your meetings, and continually think about better ways to manage the time. I had a meeting once where I had a member of my team routinely would spend 20 minutes discussing a topic when really he had only 5 minutes, and most of his conversation wasn't adding any value. He was repeating himself. What I decided to do in my meeting was to switch my agenda around slightly, and I actually put him last. And the meeting happened right before everybody went home. So he had 5 minutes at the end of the meeting to give his update. And he didn't want to go home late, and he didn't want to hold everybody back from going home late. So he was able to synthesize and give me the highlights of his problems in 5 minutes. And that was a tactic I did with someone. It doesn't always work with all of my clients or with all of my employees, but this particular person, that adjustment actually worked. As the meeting chair, it's also very important that you assign actions. Now, in a more senior team, you may find that people will volunteer and take actions on, and that's okay. But as the senior manager of that team, you should be doing a sense check, whether internally or externally with your team, if the right person picked up the right action. They may not be the right person. They just might be eager or frustrated that the right person isn't able to close out their actions. Now, for junior people or actions that are just a bit messy and nobody will volunteer for, you need to assign actions, give the actions to someone. Now, sometimes you'll take actions yourself, but a lot of the time, as the manager, you're going to have to give actions to people. And when you give the actions to them, you need to make sure that they can commit to a time. It's also imperative, as the chair of the meeting, that you make decisions or ensure decisions are made. I can't count the times I've been in meetings where a lot of information is presented to a very senior manager. It's discussed, he gives his insights, and they move right on. But the person who brought that issue to the senior manager needed the manager to help, to make a commitment, make a decision, do something. And the manager more or less said, I heard you, I hear you, let's move on. You need to make the decision, and you need to make sure it's explicit. It's not good enough to say, Jimmy, my team know I'll do it. Well, some teams may have a bit more psychic ability than other teams, but to be on the safe side, be very explicit and say, I will do this. And that may mean you need to take an action, so take the action. The decision may not be that you'll do anything. It may be to tell your team member, okay, if option 1, 2, and 3, take 3. Or with this problem you're having, I agree with the plan you have to mitigate it, continue what you're doing. But make that decision. And if your team member should be making it and they have the skills and the expertise and the authority, but they seem to be hesitating, then your job may be to try and find out from them what help you need to give them to ensure they make that decision. And again, that may be an action back on you as the chair of the meeting. But don't walk away leaving decisions hanging. It's also really important as the meeting chair that you begin to address bad behavior. And this may be things like people straying from the topic, as I had mentioned before, people not sticking on time, people not taking any actions or completing their actions. But other bad behavior could be things like attendees shouting at each other, making personal insults, people routinely coming in late, leaving early, using their mobile phones or working on their laptops in that meeting. You need to address that behavior, and really as quickly as you can. It may be appropriate to call them out in the meeting, depending on the team dynamic. You might want to take them aside and have a conversation with them. But as soon as you need to do that soon after you see that bad behavior. Otherwise, you send the message to your team, it's okay to do it. Now, sometimes you may have another senior manager, your boss, coming in to observe your meetings, and they may begin to demonstrate this bad behavior. My recommendation is that you have that conversation with them as well. It may be an unpleasant conversation to have, but do your best to explain to them the example you're trying to set for your team, and maybe tell them a bit about the journey and where you're coming from with this meeting. But as a meeting chair, if you let bad behavior slide, it just tells the rest of your team it's okay and that you're not really committed to making this change work. And that may not be your intention. You may not even think that bad behavior is a big deal. But trust me, your team is seeing it. And of course, if you are doing some of this bad behavior, like having side conversations or on the phone and you're chairing the meeting, then you really need to take a moment and check yourself. You've got to ensure your team sticks with the ground rules, which is linked to the previous point. If the people are slipping and sliding, they may be doing their best, but they're not able to get there on time. As I said previously, have that conversation and deal with it in a very timely manner. Thank you for watching the video. And if you have any questions about what a meeting chair should do during his meeting or her meeting, please leave it in the comment section and I'll get back to you. I'll see you guys in the next video.